Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, April 18, 2025. Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, speaks to reporters after returning from El Salvador, where he met with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was deported by the Trump administration and is in an El Salvador prison. The senator telling the reporters this case is more than just about Abrego Garcia. He says it's about protecting the constitutional rights of everybody who resides in the U.S. President Donald Trump is asked about this case, criticizing Senator Van Hollen, saying the deportation was justified and Abrego Garcia is a violent gang member. Dr. Mehmet Oz is sworn in as administrator of CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, pledging to deliver great care to the American people, but warning that involves facing some truths, including that health care spending is growing faster than the economy. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. may be ready to move on from efforts to reach a Russia-Ukraine war peace deal if there's not progress in the coming days. And Vice President J.D. Vance is in Rome meeting with the Italian Prime Minister and attending Good Friday services at the Vatican. ABC News writes that Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, joined the wife and mother of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the migrant who the government said in court was erroneously deported to El Salvador Friday afternoon after he returned from his trip to the country, and demanded the Trump administration bring him home and face due process. Van Hollen traveled to El Salvador on Wednesday to seek an audience with Abrego Garcia, who had been living in Maryland for years prior to his arrest and deportation and was initially refused access to the high-security CCOT prison. On Thursday, Van Hollen met with Abrego Garcia in person and posted a picture of them together on his social media pages. That was from ABC News. Here's part of the opening statement at that news conference at Dulles International Airport in Northern Virginia.
It's good to be home. Now we need to end the illegal abduction of Kilmar Abrego Garcia and bring him home too. We're joined by his wife, Jennifer, by his mother, Cecilia, by his brother, Cesar, and thank all of the rest of you who are joining us in solidarity with the Constitution and Kilmar. Look, I'm a little sleep deprived, and I want to be as clear as possible about what this is about and what it's not about. So I'm going to read the remarks that I wrote on the plane ride home. As the federal courts have said, we need to bring Mr. Abrego Garcia home to protect his constitutional rights to due process. And it's also important that people understand this case is not just about one man. It's about protecting the constitutional rights of everybody who resides in the United States of America. Yes. If you deny the constitutional rights of one man, you threaten the constitutional rights and due process for everyone else in America.
Yes.
The Fourth Circuit put it very clearly in its strong opinion yesterday, and I quote, "It is difficult in some cases to get to the very heart of the matter, but in this case, it is not hard at all. The government, in this case the Trump administration, is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims, in essence, that because it has rid itself of custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from the courthouses still hold dear."
Senator Chris Van Hollen at Dulles International Airport in Northern Virginia. He also said at one point that if the Trump administration has evidence that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a member of the MS-13 gang, they should say so in court, either put up or shut up, in the words of the senator. Associated Press reporting about this news conference, saying Van Hollen recounting the chronology of Abrego Garcia's deportation to El Salvador, saying he told him he was initially taken to Baltimore, then Texas, then put on a plane with no idea where he was going. Upon arriving, Abrego Garcia said he was traumatized by being at the CCOT prison, but said that 9 days ago he was moved to a different facility. AP writes Abrego Garcia's wife, Jennifer, wiped away tears as Van Hollen spoke of the man's comments about wanting to speak with his wife. Senator Van Hollen also talked about what he called Margarita Gate, the photo that was posted by the president of El Salvador, seeming to show glasses with alcohol on the table as he met with Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
As I was landing on the airplane, I got a transcript of some questions President Trump was asked at the White House today about what I would call Margarita Gate. I don't know if you guys have been following this, but President Bukele, after I met with Kilmar, did this tweet showing us at a table with these two glasses. So here's what happened. When I first sat down with Kilmar, we just had glasses of water on the table. I think maybe some coffee. And as we were talking, one of the government people came over and deposited two other glasses on the table with ice, and I don't know if it was salt or sugar around the top, but they look like margaritas. And if you look at the one they put in front of Kilmar, it actually had a little less liquid than the one in front of me, to try to make it look, I assume, like he drank out of it. Let me just be very clear. Neither of us touched the drinks that were in front of us. And if you want to play a little Sherlock Holmes, I'll tell you how you can know that. So if you look at the video or the picture I sent out from the beginning of our meeting, you'll see there are no glasses on the table. So you'll see in later videos they are on the table. But they made a little mistake. First, some people are very careful, right? If you sip out of one of those glasses, some of whatever it was, salt or sugar, would disappear. You would see a gap. There's no gap. Nobody drank any margaritas or sugar water or whatever it is. But this is a lesson into the lengths that President Bukele will do to deceive people about what's going on. And it's also shows the lengths that the Trump administration and the president will go to, because when he was asked about a reporter about this, he just went along for the ride. So the White House and the president have been lying about this case from the beginning. They've been trying to change the subject from the beginning. As I said, and the courts have said, from the Supreme Court to the Fourth Circuit to the District Court, what this is about is adhering to the Constitution, to the right of due process. That's right. And that's why we say, bring Kilmar home, so he can be afforded his rights under the Constitution. That's what this is about. Yeah.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, news conference at Dulles Airport in Northern Virginia after he returned from El Salvador. You can find the video of the news conference in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. President Donald Trump posting on Truth Social earlier today. Senator Van Hollen of Maryland looked like a fool yesterday standing in El Salvador begging for attention from the fake news media or anyone grandstander. And in the White House Oval Office, a reporter asked the president about this case and those drinks that looked like alcohol.
Photos have emerged of Senator Van Hollen sipping what appears to be margaritas with Abrego Garcia down in El Salvador. Do you encourage other Democrats to fly down to El Salvador to meet with this illegal alien who's an accused wife?
I like this guy. See, now this is the kind of a reporter we like. There aren't enough of them. We got to get some more of them. But no, I appreciate that question. No, look, he's a fake. I know him. I know them all. They're all fake. And they have no interest in that prisoner. That prisoner's record is unbelievably bad. If you would go into the room, you might, if you would, Caroline, maybe go into the room and see if you can find that little slip. I wrote some things down. I don't know why you'd want to keep them, but I just, we got a little biography of him. Not a very innocent guy. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, in the spirit of Easter Sunday.
While we're on the subject, right?
Yes, of course.
So you're talking about Abrego Garcia. Is that the one? Yeah. Is an illegal alien, MS-13 gang member and foreign terrorist. This comes out of the State Department and very legitimate sources. I mean, I assume I'm just giving you what they handed to me, but this was supposed to be certified stuff. In 2019, Garcia was issued a deportation order. 2 separate judges affirmed Garcia was a member of MS-13, which is a gang that may be even worse than Tren de Aragua, and maybe worse. They kill people with knives because it's more painful. Very famous for the knifing and killing of 2 young 16-year-old girls walking to school one day, and they sliced them up into little pieces and killed them. That's MS-13. And 2 separate judges affirmed Garcia was a member of MS-13. When Garcia was originally arrested, he was wearing a sweatshirt with rolls of money pouring out, an MS-13 gang symbol, that he was driving with 2 other known violent MS-13 gang members, 2 of the most violent members that we know of in the MS-13 gang of thugs. In 2022, Garcia was stopped by the Tennessee Highway Patrol and was found to be transporting 7 people from Texas to Maryland, and he had no driver's license. He was driving violently. In 2020 and 2021, Garcia's wife filed for a protective order from him and said he was violent and abusive and really scary, including allegations that he punched and scratched her on the eye, left her bleeding after throwing her laptop on the floor at her, ripped her shirt, and ripped off her shorts. He then grabbed her arm, leaving very severe marks. Garcia's wife also wrote in court, "At this point, I am afraid to be close to him. I just don't want to be close. I have multiple photos and videos, how violent he can be, and all of the bruises that he's left on me." She just couldn't get anywhere near him. This is the man that the Democrats are wanting us to fly back from El Salvador to be a happily ensconced member of the USA family. Isn't it a shame? And by the way, I've been hit pretty hard by fake shows, fake news, MSDNC in particular, where they talk about how evil I am, that this man would be thrown out of our country. This man is according to certified statements that we get, is a very violent person.
President Donald Trump, part of a news conference in the White House Oval Office. A statement from the attorney of the wife of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, Jennifer Vasquez-Sura, from earlier this week reads, "After surviving domestic violence in a previous relationship, I acted out of caution after a disagreement with Kilmar by seeking a protective order in case things escalated. We were able to work through this situation privately as a family, including by going to counseling. Kilmar has always been a loving partner and father, and I will continue to stand by him and demand justice for him." Baltimore Sun says that following Senator Chris Van Hollen's meeting with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, Congressman Glenn Ivey is the next member of Maryland's congressional delegation who says he will visit the Central American nation to see the mistakenly deported man. And there's a story from the Washington Post. The case of a Maryland man who was illegally deported to a notorious prison in El Salvador is confronting conservatives with a clash of 2 long-held principles: fighting illegal immigration and defending personal liberties. Most Republicans and virtually all GOP lawmakers have responded by stressing Kilmar Abrego Garcia's status as an undocumented immigrant, as well as claims, which he and others have disputed, that he is a gang member. But a small, if growing, number of conservatives are criticizing the Trump administration for what they call a trampling of basic rights, especially in challenging a recent Supreme Court ruling backing Abrego Garcia's return. That was from the Washington Post. And this is Washington Today. Dr. Mehmet Oz was sworn in today at the White House as administrator of CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. The Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., administering the oath. CMS oversees programs providing health care coverage for about half of the U.S. population. Senate confirmed Dr. Oz in a party line vote earlier this month. Dr. Oz saying he wants to provide America with access to great care, but to do that, he says we've got to be honest with each other.
Bullet point number 1, and they're all numbered in order for a reason. Medicaid is the number 1 budget item for many states, and it is crowding out education, other important social programs. The states are having a big problem, and that's with the federal government paying most of the bill. Item number 2, healthcare expenditures are increasing at 2% higher than the economy is growing. And because of that, we spend more than 2 times per person on health care than any other country on the planet, and we're not getting value for that. Because number 3, is that we are, in America, experiencing an unfortunate problem, which is medical errors are the #3 cause of death. Did you know that, Mr. President? It's surprising with that much money invested, we're still having problems. And #4, our life expectancy, despite all this investment, is continuing to slip back. We're now more than 4 years shorter in our life expectancy than countries that we used to be equal to. But I am optimistic. Why? Because we control our destiny. Because at its very core, we have a generational opportunity, a unique ability to save the healthcare system because we control all the big pieces. America is too great for small dreams. So I've got some big ideas that I'd like to share that we've worked through with my staff who are cordoned off over there, and there's a lot of us. We've got almost more than 6,000 people at CMS working on this and 40,000 contractors helping. So we've got a lot of people. What are we going to do? First, we're going to reduce chronic disease. How do you do that? 70% of the healthcare expenditures of this country are driven by chronic disease. And it is your patriotic duty, I'll say it again, the patriotic duty of all Americans to take care of themselves, because it's important for serving in the military, but it's also important because healthy people don't consume healthcare resources. The best way to reduce drug spending is to use less drugs because you don't need them because you're healthy. And it feels a lot better as well. The President and Secretary Kennedy have been pushing the MAHA agenda because it makes it easier for people to do the right thing, especially the mothers of this great land, because they're the ones who really get caught with this responsibility. They're the ones deciding for their kids. They're the ones we want to empower. And curiosity, which is the key word here, truly asking questions you want the answers to, will allow the MAHA movement to thrive. The next big thing we want to focus on is modernizing Medicare and Medicaid. That's how Americans will get the care that they want, need, and deserve. We need to empower patients and providers, both. The doctors and the patients both have to be equipped with better tools. And the President is showing that he actually does love and cherish Medicare with all these executive orders, like the one on transparency, sir, that really helps us by making sure people are equipped with information. So you shine a light in the dark shadows where so much of the problems happen with the healthcare system. And remember, the most expensive care is bad quality care. That's what we want to stamp out. And finally, we want to crush fraud, waste, and abuse. This is stunning to me. And I've got a message for all the bad guys from me, the Secretary, and the President. We are going to stop people from stealing from our most vulnerable, from stealing with the taxpayers of America, or honestly trying to support these programs. And we're going to be able to do it in quite a few ways. We are coming for you. And I'll give you a couple examples. Mr. President, these are ones that you may want to use in some of your future conversations. Almost 250,000 people, American citizens, were fraudulently enrolled without their knowledge in exchange programs by brokers who were unscrupulous, stealing from the U.S. government by pretending these people were on programs they never told them about. Tens of millions of dollars, Mr. President, are being spent on illegal immigrants receiving Medicaid in California, and they're pushing the bill to us. Should we stop that? I think so. That will not continue. We're spending about $1 billion on Medicaid programs for dual state eligible patients, which means you live in one state, but the system thinks you're another state, and maybe a third state, and we're paying all 3 states for services you're not getting because you don't live in 3 states all at once. And finally, and this one really bothers me, there are states who are using Medicaid dollars for people who are vulnerable are being used for non-medical purposes. For example, public labor unions are getting child care through some of this money. That doesn't make sense to me. Housekeeping, I wish I could get that for my home. There's a big problem with student loan repayments taking place with Medicaid dollars. That's not where it should be used. And we are paying for DEI programs. I could go on, but these are all programs, Mr. President, that we have created a war room at CMS to go after, to catch the fraud in real time before the money leaves the federal coffers. So we have the money to reinvest in healthcare to make it even stronger than it's been before. Together, we're going to make the care better. We're going to make the outcomes improve, and we're going to make sure that America can actually be the healthiest country that could ever possibly be. We'll make America healthy again. God bless you both, sir.
Dr. Mehmet Oz, the administrator of Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, at his swearing-in ceremony today in the White House Oval Office with President Trump and Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. President Trump praising Dr. Oz's medical and professional qualifications, including being, in his words, an internationally acclaimed heart and lung surgeon. And the president recalling going on the Dr. Oz TV show and Dr. Oz telling him he was a little overweight, needed to lose weight. President also said, as CMS Administrator, Dr. Oz will work tirelessly to strengthen and protect Medicare for our nation's seniors and Medicaid for the needy. There will be no cuts, in the president's words. U.S. House Democrats have designated Thursday as Medicaid Matters Day of Action. as Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries wrote to aggressively push back against Republican plans to crash our economy and impose the largest Medicaid cut in American history. Congressman Ted Lieu, Democrat from California, posted this video.
I'm calling the Trump administration to take their hands off Medicaid. Republicans are proposing a massive tax cut to billionaires and funding it with massive cuts to Medicaid. Hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts to Medicaid. And this is a particularly devastating effect in California. Over 60% of all federal funding to California is from Medicaid. This is going to affect hospitals and clinics and nursing homes. In fact, 2/3 of nursing home patients get funded by Medicaid. This will have a devastating effect on families across California, and it's going to harm the health care of millions and millions of Americans. So again, we're asking congressional Republicans to join the congressional Democrats to tell the Trump administration to keep their hands off Medicaid.
Congressman Ted Lieu, Democrat from California, posting that video. The Wall Street Journal editorial board today backing up Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell after President Trump criticized Powell this week for not cutting interest rates and saying that tariff increases would increase inflation and reduce economic growth. The president also saying Powell's termination cannot come fast enough. The Journal writing the problem for Mr. Trump is that Mr. Powell spoke the truth and that tariffs are taxes. The White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett spoke to reporters today in the White House driveway about the Fed chair and tariffs.
Mr. Hassett, you wrote in your 2021 book that firing Jerome Powell during the president's first term would have savaged the reputation of the Federal Reserve Board as an objective and independent manager of the nation's money supply. The credibility of the dollar would have been compromised. The stock market might have crashed. Do you stand by that assessment?
I think that at that time, the market was in a completely different place, and I was referring to the legal analysis that we had back then, and if there's new legal analysis that says something different, then it would be a different market response as well.
President Trump said yesterday
Trump team, or the U.S. team and China, President Trump says, are communicating in talks on a potential deal. Can you discuss any more of what that looks like?
I can't discuss anything about China right now.
Anything that might progress from that?
I'm sorry, I don't have anything to add on that. Sorry. But you get another question then, right? Because it's no fair if you ask a question and I say I can't respond.
I know you mentioned that there was something about 15 or potentially 20 deals on the table the last time we checked in. Do you have an update on that number?
It's more than 15 now that I asked Jameson Greer yesterday to give you a readout. And a deal on the table is specifically, like people have listed here are the things we're willing to do, and they're really big steps forward for the American worker.
And going off my colleague's question, do you think firing Jay Powell is an option now in a way that it wasn't before?
The president and his team will continue to study that matter.
But have President Xi and Trump actually spoken?
Excuse me?
Have President Trump and President Xi Jinping spoken?
I don't have anything to add on China right now.
Has China reached out?
I guess not anything to add on China. We could keep going, but no, I don't have anything to add on China.
You mentioned there's more than 15 deals on the table.
Back here.
Sir, Jordan Conrad's from Gateway Fund. I have two questions. So firstly, President Trump has brought in over $21 billion in revenue, but he's facing criticism from the media for that number not being higher. Do you expect that number to increase, and how does that number $21 billion compare to previous administrations?
Well, what's going to happen is that revenue is going to go up a lot, and revenue is going to go up a lot from the tariff revenue, from the people who continue to send stuff into the U.S. But when we create jobs in the U.S., that's also going to increase tax revenue by a lot. If you think about imports in the U.S., it's about 16% of GDP, as 14 to 16%, and let's say 85% is domestic production. And so as stuff moves on shore domestically, then you could create a lot more revenue than you get from the tariff. And so in the end, we're really bullish on revenue and really bullish on tariff revenue. And as stuff onshores, which is happening way faster than I expected, then there's going to be a lot more tax revenue as well.
The White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett speaking to reporters today in the White House driveway. Story from CNN, the United States has unveiled plans to impose new port fees on Chinese ships, saying it aims to revive American shipbuilding against China's dominance in the industry. The Federal Register notice posted by the U.S. Trade Representative on Thursday said the U.S. government will charge fees on all Chinese-built and owned ships docking in U.S. ports based on net tonnage or goods carried on each voyage. The new fees will be enforced in around 180 days' time, rolled out in a phased manner and may be raised in coming years, according to the notice. That was from CNN. New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ closed today in observance of Good Friday. Today is the 250th anniversary of Paul Revere's famous midnight ride in 1775 to warn the Minutemen in the province of Massachusetts Bay that British Army troops were approaching before the battles of Lexington and Concord. Senator Angus King, independent from Maine, sees lessons for today's political and public policy battles between parties and branches of government.
Exactly 250 years ago, Paul Revere made his famous midnight ride from Boston to Lexington and Concord to warn the colonists of an impending attack from the British. We're in a similar moment today where we must take warning not about an attack from a foreign adversary, but for an attack on our Constitution, on the concentration of power in one set of hands. The framers of our Constitution did not want a king. They did not want a monarch. That's why they divided power up between the Congress, the president, and the courts. What's happening today is a dangerous concentration of power, which our friend James Madison, back at the time of the founding of the Constitution, said, when you have judicial, legislative, and executive power in one set of hands, it's a perfect definition of tyranny. This is dangerous for our country. We have three sets of guardrails against what's going on right now. One is the Congress, and I'm afraid we're not doing very well. We're not stepping up to demand that the president not encroach on the powers delegated to the Congress by the Constitution. The second line of defense is the courts, and they're doing a pretty good job, but they need to know that the people and the Congress are behind them. The final line of defense is you, the American people, raising your voices, talking to your friends, attending rallies, expressing yourself and your concerns about what's happening to our Constitution and the rule of law. So, that's the charge. That's the message. Paul Revere would be telling us now, the Constitution is in danger. It's time to come to the aid of your country.
Senator Angus King, independent from Maine, posting that video today. Associated Press writes that about 10,000 pages of records related to the 1968 assassination of Senator Robert F. Kennedy were released Friday, including handwritten notes by the gunman who said the Democratic presidential candidate must be disposed of and acknowledged an obsession with killing him. The release continued the disclosure of national secrets ordered by President Donald Trump. That was from AP. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea. It's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. New York Times reports the United States will abandon efforts to end the war in Ukraine if it proves impossible to broker meaningful progress in the next several days, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in remarks that piled pressure on Kyiv as he departed Paris on Friday. Times writes it's not entirely clear from Mr. Rubio's remarks whether he meant the U.S. would merely abandon its effort to reach a 30-day ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, President Trump's immediate focus, or abandoning Washington's commitments to Ukraine altogether. But his remarks were certain to worry Ukraine, which is heavily dependent on American military support, and appeared intended to inject urgency into European efforts to prod Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, toward painful compromise. That was from the New York Times article. Secretary Rubio spoke to reporters at the airport in Paris after meeting French President Emmanuel Macron today, and one day after high-level meetings among American, European, and Ukrainian officials on the Russia-Ukraine war.
I think it's important to remind everybody that the Ukraine war is a terrible thing, but it's not our war. We didn't start it. The United States has been helping Ukraine over the last 3 years, and we want it to end. But it's not our war. I want everyone to understand that. And the reason why I make that point is the president has spent 87 days at the highest level of his government repeatedly taking efforts to bring this war to an end. We are now reaching a point where we need to decide and determine whether this is even possible or not, which is why we're engaging both sides. As you know, Ambassador Witkoff has had not one, not two, but 3 meetings with Vladimir Putin to determine the Russian perspective on this and understand what it would take for them to end it. We, through General Kellogg, myself, and others, have had repeated engagements with the Ukrainians. So we came here yesterday to sort of begin to talk about more specific outlines of what it might take to end a war, to try to figure out very soon, and I'm talking about a matter of days, not a matter of weeks, whether or not this is the war that can be ended. If it can, we're prepared to do whatever we can to facilitate that and make sure that it happens, that it ends in a durable and just way. If it's not possible, if we're so far apart that this is not going to happen, then I think the president's probably at a point where he's going to say, well, we're done. You know, we'll do what we can on the margins. We'll be ready to help whenever you're ready to have peace. But we're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about in a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on as well.
Mr. Secretary, Michael Gordon, Wall Street Journal. The State Department said yesterday that a framework had been presented to all sides, to the Ukrainians, to the European officials, and to the Russians. What does the framework say? What issues does it resolve?
I'm not going to tell you what the framework says, because when you start negotiating these things through the media and so forth, they fall apart. And it's a broad framework. It's a framework that gets us into a position to see, look, there are going to be differences. There's no one saying this can be done in 12 hours. But we want to see how far apart it is and whether those differences can even be narrowed, if it's even possible to get movement within the period of time we have in mind. And so we've talked about outlines with both sides. I thought we had positive meetings yesterday. Obviously, the Ukrainians have to go back home. They have to run it by their president. They have to take into account, their views on all of this, and we hope to hear back from them very soon. But we need to figure out here now, within a matter of days, whether this is doable in the short term. Because if it's not, then I think we're just going to move on from our perspective. The president feels very strongly about that. He has dedicated a lot of time and energy to this, and there are a lot of things going on in the world right now that we need to be focused on. So this is important, but there are a lot of other really important things going on that deserve just as much, if not more, attention. So we want to do everything we can to be helpful. We had a good meeting yesterday. I thought the French, the British, the Germans were very constructive, were very helpful. We thank them for hosting this, and hopefully we'll have another meeting early next week at some point. We'll have some more definitive answers about how close we are to actually making progress. But this isn't going to go on forever.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking to reporters at the airport in Paris. Later, President Trump was asked about the secretary's remarks during an Oval Office news conference.
Secretary Rubio said that the U.S. will have to figure out whether a deal can be done between Russia and Ukraine in a matter of days, or you will just move on.
Yeah, very short.
How many days is that?
No specific number of days, but quickly. We want to get it done. We're talking about here people dying, and we're talking about over there people are dying also, like on average 2,500 young people, soldiers. They're not from America. They're not from anywhere else other than Ukraine and Russia. But we want to save these lives. So it's 2,500 a week are being killed in battle. It's a vicious battle with the best equipment, the best everything, and it is brutal. 2,500 young people a week. Some of them not so young, actually. They're getting older. They're getting older by the month. But 2,500 a week, and we're going to get it stopped ideally. Now, if for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult, we're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass. But hopefully we won't have to do that. Now, Marco's right in saying it. We want to see it end. Think of it. Every day, a lot of people are being killed as we talk about, as they play games. So we're not going to take that, and we'll see. I think we have a good chance of solving the problem, however. Yeah.
President Donald Trump taking reporters' questions today in the White House Oval Office. Associated Press reporting on Secretary Rubio's comments, writing, when asked about the comments on Friday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that fairly complex negotiations are ongoing between Russia and the U.S. He did not give details, but said no direct talks between President Trump and President Putin are scheduled in the coming days. He said Russia is striving toward resolving this conflict, securing its own interests, and is open to dialogue. We are continuing to do this. AP writes that Peskov also stressed that a limited 30-day ceasefire backed by Washington that both Russia and Ukraine last month embraced in principle has now lapsed, but did not say what steps Moscow might take next. Also a story from NPR. Ukraine on Friday sanctioned 3 Chinese companies a day after President Volodymyr Zelensky accused China of supplying weapons to Russia, an accusation Beijing has rejected. The sanctions mean that companies will not be able to do business with Ukraine, and any assets they have in the country will be frozen. Reporting from NPR. The Russia-Ukraine war also came up when Vice President J.D. Vance made an official visit today to Italy. Complete with a formal welcome ceremony, Vice President Vance met one-on-one with the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni in Rome a day after the Prime Minister met with President Trump at the White House. We begin their comments after the Prime Minister has made some remarks in Italian and then switched over to English.
I was simply saying thank you for being here. I want to add that I'm proud that you decided to pass the Easter here in Rome, and we really hope you will enjoy this time, and that I'm honored to welcome you here in Palazzo Chigi after the wonderful meeting we had yesterday in Washington, in which we've been discussing many topics. Many others we will discuss today, but in any case, Italy and the United States are committed to enhance their strong cooperation. We think Italy can be a reliable and a serious partner in Europe, in the Mediterranean area, and so we are proud to have this special relation with the U.S. and with this administration.
Great. Well, thank you, Prime Minister Meloni. It's wonderful to see you again. And I hope that's exactly what you said. Of course, she could have called me a jerk and I wouldn't know, but it would be in the most beautiful language imaginable, and so I wouldn't even get offended. But I appreciate our friendship, both between our nations, but also between us personally, and certainly the President sends his best regards to you, but to the people of Italy. I couldn't help, as I drove around these streets, we arrived this morning with my wife and our 3 young children. We're looking forward to spending Easter here, but this is a place that was built by people that love humans and love God, and the streets, the buildings, the beautiful landscape and cityscape, I think it really lifts up the human spirit. So we're going to have some good conversations, but I also take some inspiration from being in this beautiful city filled with wonderful people, and so we're grateful to you and, of course, to the people of Rome, the people of Italy, for their friendship and also for their warm welcome. We have a couple of important issues to discuss today. I want to update the Prime Minister on some of the negotiations between Russia, Ukraine, and also some of the things that have happened. Even in the past 24 hours, we think we have some interesting things to report on, of course, in private. So these negotiations, I won't prejudge them, but we do feel optimistic that we can hopefully bring this war, this very brutal war, to a close. I also, of course, want to talk to the Prime Minister about some of the economic relationships, very important between Italy and the United States. But, of course, we're having some big trade negotiations between not just Italy and the United States, but the whole European Union. We talked a great deal about that yesterday with the President, and we'll follow up on those conversations today. But most of all, just thrilled to be in the presence of a dear friend in a beautiful place with great people. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Vice President J.D. Vance and the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni today in Rome. The Vice President's office says he will next go to India to meet the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, with stops in New Delhi, Jaipur, and Agra. By the way, President Donald Trump is expected to make his first foreign trip in May to Saudi Arabia. While in Rome, Vice President Vance attended Good Friday celebrations at St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City, also met with the Vatican Secretary of State. Many members of the U.S. Congress posting on Good Friday. Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, writing, "Today, Christians around the globe will observe Good Friday. We call this day Good Friday because we remember that horrible Friday led to the greatest good of all, the resurrection of Jesus, his victory over sin and death, and the free gift of eternal life to all who believe." And Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, writing on X, "Move through uncertainty with the understanding that there is hope and joy on the other side." My final guest in my Lenten Reflection series, Senator Maggie Hassan, Democrat from New Hampshire, provided a fitting close to weeks of reflection and grace. And Senator Coons attached this video.
I'm thrilled to spend a little time today with my dear friend, Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire. Maggie, thanks for joining my Lenten Reflection series and for being a really good friend and a good partner in faith as we navigate the tough times here in the U.S. Senate.
It's really good to be with you too, Chris. And as we are moving our way through the Lenten season, it's an important time to reflect at a time where a lot of people are really struggling and really worried about our future, really worried about how they and their family are going to make it through the next week and month, a time of great uncertainty. And Lent is a really important time to reflect on the fact that part of what we do as humans on God's earth is to move through uncertainty with the understanding that there is hope and joy on the other side. I'm really lucky because I go home to New Hampshire most weekends as you go home to Delaware, and we're about to have a couple of weeks where we get to be back in our states and talking with our constituents, and I get to see the good that they do each and every day, despite the worry and despite the conflict at times, despite the sense of division that is in the country. There are people in New Hampshire working together and making progress every day, and they're doing it without saying, are you a Democrat, are you a Republican? They're doing it because they know it's the right thing to do to help their friends and neighbors in their state and their country. So it's a tough time right now, but we are reminded that as we walk through tough times, there's joy on the other side.
All things do work to the good. It is hard to see sometimes, and I'm grateful that we will get to both be home for Holy Week and for Easter. Thanks for being such a great friend.
Thank you, Chris.
Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware, posting that video today, joined by Senator Maggie Hassan, Democrat from New Hampshire. President Donald Trump, at the start of the week, issued a Holy Week presidential message that begins this Holy Week. Melania and I join in prayer with Christians celebrating the crucifixion and resurrection of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the living Son of God who conquered death, freed us from sin, and unlocked the gates of heaven for all humanity. On Wednesday, the president hosted an Easter prayer dinner at the White House.
The death and resurrection of Jesus are the essence of the Christian faith. Whether rich or poor, healthy or sick, young or old, or in times of peace or war, Christians everywhere find solace and hope in the knowledge that Christ died for them and that they could be united with him in heaven. And that's what we want. That's what we all want. The miracles of Holy Week set in motion a transformation in human existence. Countless millions of Americans have been moved by Christ's example to heal the sick, defend their families, lift up their communities, and make our country stronger, better, and greater than ever before. With God's grace over these past 3 months, and we have had a great 3 months. They say maybe the best 3 months ever for a president and an administration. It was really great. We have fantastic people, and they're people that believe like you do. But we've achieved more than most administrations, they've been saying, do in 4 years or even 8 years, just in a short period of time. And I think there's a whole new spirit in our country, and I think there's a whole new respect for our country. Our country was not respected 5 months ago, 6 months ago, although I think November 5th did a lot to get that respect, Franklin. I think it was a big day. I hope it's going to go down as one of the most important days in the history of our country, November 5th.
President Donald Trump at the Easter prayer dinner at the White House on Wednesday. Story from Yahoo News, the 147th White House Easter egg roll hosted by President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump will be held on Monday with thousands of real eggs. Despite skyrocketing prices for consumers, the American Egg Board President Emily Metz said the eggs required for our national tradition represent a very small percentage of the nearly 9 million dozen eggs sold at grocers and other retailers across the country each day. Additionally, the eggs used for the White House Easter egg roll will be in sizes small and medium, which are not meant for retail and grocery channels. That was from Yahoo News. And finally, on Washington Today, the White House Correspondents Association dinner is just 1 week away, April 26th. The annual black tie gathering at the Washington Hilton always comes with its share of surprises. And on the latest episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly Podcast, host Howard Mortman sits down with 4 former White House Correspondents Association presidents. They share stories about how they picked the night's comedians, their favorite memories from the dinner, and much more. Here's Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief of Real Clear Politics, recalling one of his favorite moments from the dinner.
What's it like to eat in front of 3,000, 2,000, 3,000 people at the basement of the Washington Hilton and millions of people watching on C-SPAN? What's it like to have dinner and eat your food in front of that many people?
You know, Howard, that's interesting because you forget about the cameras immediately. The lights are kind of in your face, so if you're thinking about it, but the room is full of people, but they're not watching you. They're all in their conversations. I've been on most of the years I've been down on the floor. You have too, at these tables, and you're engrossed in conversations with your guests, with your people. You're trying to hear. It's packed. But what's interesting about being up there on the dais at the head table is that it's surprisingly intimate. People can't hear your conversation down below. The C-SPAN cameras they don't have the directional mics. The only microphone is the one at the podium. It's turned off during their eating. And you actually can interact with these people. I covered the White House for 15 years. But the most informative exchanges and interesting and human exchanges I had with Hillary Clinton, with Bill Clinton, Dick Cheney, Dick Cheney's wife, Bush and Laura, were at these dinners up there because I kind of forgot about it. And, so Dick Cheney, the year before, 2001, I guess, or 2002, I think it was 2002, Cheney had just gotten out of the hospital, right? And he had said something to the pool, the pool had asked him, I don't think it was Ron Fournier, but AP, but somebody said, when he had a stent put in, I think, in his heart at George Washington University Hospital, and said, well, you must be happy to go home and have a home-cooked meal. Just a throwaway line, just to human. And Cheney, he could quip. He had a nice sense of humor. He said, well, you wouldn't say that if you ever tasted my wife's cooking, which I'm sure he immediately regretted. So I'm sitting next to Cheney. I've had a drink or two, and I can't help but ask him, so, Dick, did you have to spend the night on the couch after you got back from the hospital? And he said, don't go there, Carl. And Liz Cheney looks over, and she's starting to listen. I said, Liz, can I ask you what your reaction was to that? She said, I'll say this. The vice president's comment wasn't inaccurate, but I found it gratuitous. Well, these are the kind of exchanges when you're covering people, Howard. They're valuable. They help humanize the people. They help remind you that they're people like us. I think it's in true and reverse. This era we're going through now is very difficult, and I hope that the dinner survives this era, frankly, because I think it's important. One night a year. It's one night a year we put away our swords and we recognize the humanity of the other side. And I actually think it's important and good.
You can hear the whole conversation with Carl Cannon and more from USA Today's Susan Page, NPR's Tamara Keith, and former ABC White House correspondent Ann Compton on the latest episode of The Weekly Podcast with 4 former White House Correspondents Association presidents 1 week before this year's association dinner. The Weekly Podcast available now wherever you find your podcasts. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. Get the stories making headlines in Washington. Emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.